we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, the host of the LEO First Podcast. We have something new that we're doing tonight, and as part of my vision with this show is to continue on with episodes like this. What makes this one different from all the other ones? If you've seen any of the previews or you've heard me talk in the past, we're going to have multiple guests on tonight. And I'm so excited because this will give me the opportunity to have two different minds going together at once. And while it's usually good with me and one other person, I think it's going to be so much better with three of us on here. We've already had a lot of fun in the green room. We've been joking around. We've been cracking jokes. And I just know based on the two people you're going to hear from tonight, you're going to have the same kind of joy, because as I look through their history, as I look through some of the things that they had going on in their lives currently and in the past, I know you guys are going to find value in it. And I know that these two have been impactful to the law enforcement industry. And I know anything we talk about tonight, you're going to be able to implement immediately. I just have that feeling. So without me rambling any further, our two guests tonight is Vincent Plair and Marc Jackson. Now, it ain't Marc Jackson from the NBA analyst. And yes, Mark, I just made this up as I could. It just popped in my head. That's the best part of having an unscripted show. You just say what comes up in your mind. But those are our two guests tonight, guys. Vincent Plair and Marc Jackson. We're going to start off with Vincent since he was the one that brought Mark with him tonight. Tell us about who you are, Vincent.
All right, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be in the space with you, and of course, Marc Jackson. Even though he says that I'm not refined, so I got to let the refined side of me come out tonight. So, originally from New York, migrated to California when I was in high school. My dad was Air Force. Parents were divorced, and find myself leaving New York, coming to California. Talk about a culture shock, being from the Bronx to lonely Edwards Air Force Base, went to high school there, matriculated to college, eventually wound up at the University of Houston, Phi Slamma Jamma. I rocked with Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler, all those guys there. Then found myself going to the Marine Corps as a military officer, did 4 years active duty there, then matriculated into law enforcement and spent 32 years at the county sheriff's department. I guess amongst my biggest achievements is I'm a husband, I'm a father of two. I have a 7-year-old son who I think is going to be he's going to do something great in the world. I just know it. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be something great. And my daughter, who is 5 years old, who is kind of on his coattails. So that's what makes me. Aside from that, hopefully we'll get into the subject today about like transitioning from law enforcement and doing other things. I think you'll find that, again, this is the New York in me, Mark. You know, we're all about the hustle. I got a lot of hustles going on aside from the job that I currently do when I retired from LA County Sheriff's Department. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And if I can turn it over to my esteemed co-guest, Marc the Man Jackson.
Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead. He done set the table for you. You got a lot. And the movie star, Marc Jackson. Go ahead.
Yeah. Vinny, listen, man. Awesome intro. Michael, thank you for the intro. Thank you for allowing me to share, like Vinny said, share the space with you. So Vinny, I take it back. You are actually a refined New Yorker. So listen, let's move forward on a more positive tone. But similar to Vinny, but definitely not as esteemed. I'm from Cleveland, born, raised until I was 10 years old, 11 years old. We migrated from the East Coast or Midwest to the West Coast to California. Did most of my growing up in Long Beach, California. From there, it was Marine Corps. I wasn't an officer, unfortunately, so Vinny actually got to tell me what to do. I was just an enlisted dude, a knuckle dragger. Then from there, after my four, went to the Sheriff's Department, LA County. Did that for, I think it was like 5 months short of 30. And that's because I got an injury that kind of caught up with me. Mm-hmm. But did my career there. I worked quite a few different units. I was a career investigator. I look at my retirement checks now, and I wish I would have done things a little differently. But other than that, career investigator, station detective, a couple different stations, Carson, Compton, West Hollywood. Then from there, it was Major Crimes Bureau, Vice, Organized Crime, Cargo Theft. I did a year in homicide, and then I went back to Major Crimes from there. Let's see, now I'm a director of corporate security for a company. Actually, the building behind you, Vinny, on your screen, that's actually one of our accounts. I get to DC every now and then, but other than that, that's me in a nutshell. And I guess you can see by now, or you're convinced by now, that I'm not Marc Jackson, the NBA guy. So,
well, they're not convinced yet, but as we go on through the show, they're definitely going to be more convinced about it throughout. Hopefully, they're going to tell some distinct differences. Now, I'm gonna be completely transparent with you guys, and I didn't do enough homework initially, which was good. But as I took a quick skim through both of your profiles, and now you guys reaffirmed that you guys both worked for the LA County Sheriff's Office, right?
Yes.
That's correct. So
yeah.
It's actually funny, and it is a true story. I wrote it in my book and everything. So there was a pretty major incident that happened in California in June of 1994. You guys remember that?
Are we talking Arco Narco or one of the other scandals?
A white Bronco.
Oh,
okay.
OJ.
Yes. So I was 9 at the time, and I can remember being glued to that TV between the chase, the trial, just everything that went on with it. And for me, that was my mark. That was my first sign that I wanted to be in law enforcement. What I said I wanted to do was that I wanted to be a homicide detective in LA, just based on everything I saw. So when I had both of you guys on here, I was like, man, it's like a 2-for-1. I get to tell both of them what I want to do, because everybody I've interviewed, I've had some people from California, but I've never had anybody from LA. So this was my time. I could actually tell people, especially people that worked during that era in that city. And when you guys were going, like when all that stuff was going on, like what was the atmosphere like? Like, can you guys kind of like expound on that, especially being Black male law enforcement officers in that environment? Let's keep it real. I mean, it's like what was your experience? Because what we saw in Florida on TV did not capture anything on how you guys were on the streets and doing your job. Like, what was that like?
I'll start. I remember, this is a true story, by the way, is when he was on the 405 freeway going north. I mean, I was on the same freeway, but where I was when that chase occurred, I was in an area where I could see that something was going on. A lot of lights and sirens, and you turn and flip on the news, oh, they're chasing OJ. So that's when anybody mentions that, I go back to that time where I'm standing outside and I see and I hear all these cars chasing OJ Simpson. So that was like a very vivid memory for me at the time, even though it was a different agency, LAPD that was doing the chase. But I still remember I was off that day when that pursuit occurred.
What about you, Mark? How was that time for you?
Well, it was an interesting time, and it's actually a very critical time in my career, Michael. And I'll give you a snippet of it. The critical part of it was simply Marc Jackson is known to, at all costs, I'm going to keep it light, right? I'm going to try and keep the room light. I'm going to try and not focus on the negative, focus on the positive. Long story short, I did something on the department that caused me to be disciplined. So at that time, I was actually waiting for them to adjudicate, departmentally, I was waiting for them to adjudicate, was I going to get a day off? Was I going to get 10 days off? I was waiting for my punishment. And I happened to be at the Hall of Justice at that moment, and that's downtown LA.
Okay.
And let me tell you, that was kind of the center of the storm, so to speak, because they were looking at OJ. LAPD is right down the street. Of course, LA Sheriff has their hand in it, but again, it's an LAPD case, so we're not going to step in, but we always assist our sister agencies. So with that being said, there was a lot of buzz. And ironically, the floor of the Hall of Justice that I was on was actually the homicide floor. So I was privy to a lot of the conversation, a lot of portions of that. And again, I guess this is unfair to say, but it is what it is. There's some insider activity that I was privy to while I was on that floor as the homicide investigators would speak at that time. So it was interesting to watch the reality of the investigation unfold, and then the public perception, and then of course how the news frames it and then spits it out. So yeah, it was a critical time for me, Michael, simply because I was waiting for my, impending house dropping on my head. And then of course, OJ happened. So it was an interesting thing. And then the last point to that was, as the OJ thing was unfolding, I was told that the office that I worked in temporarily while I was waiting for my discipline, it was actually the courtroom where they tried Charles Manson. So it was an interesting exchange of information and feelings. And then, Michael, you alluded to something earlier. You said, as a Black man, the interesting thing about OJ and in law enforcement is that law enforcement, you got to be very careful, and as you know, and as Vinny knows, you got to be careful, because if you're not considered in the car, meaning good with the fellas, your career is pretty much in the basket. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of wrangling. There's a lot of positioning. There's a lot of prefacing that you need to do when it comes to matters like OJ. I'm one of those guys where I felt like, yeah, he did it. Absolutely. Well, of course, there was a big population of our big portion of our community, meaning the Black community, that simply would not accept the facts as they saw them. And they did not come to that conclusion. They thought OJ was innocent. How could he? He was America's sweetheart, right? OJ had no color. OJ was neutral, So how could OJ, this guy, do all these things? So again, it was an interesting time, not only because of the event itself, but just there was a lot of things swirling. And then, of course, the department, everybody's kind of looking at each other. Well, where do you stand? What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. Similar to the Rodney King incident. And I don't know if you want to go into that, but there's some similarities there when it comes to being Black while wearing blue. There's interesting aspects to that again, you had to be very careful what you said and how you said it, because you could be very quickly be ostracized and discarded by one group where you're accepted by another, so it was a weird time.
That's why I kind of wanted to touch on, probably later in our chat here, is these, I don't want to say two cultures, but I want to say two cultures that exist within law enforcement, which
jump into it. Let's get into it. We jump feet first in the things. Come on.
I think it's like the elephant in the room that's not really talked about in law enforcement. We talk about organizational culture as being this synonymous culture within law enforcement, but we don't talk about like how this duality in cultures may exist in law enforcement. Like during OJ time, you're stepping on, you're really, you could be with this group, I don't know where I fit in. You could be with this group, I don't know how I fit in. And I remember during the former presidency, when Trump was running for election, again, the duality of cultures that existed in the agency. And this, again, true story. I saw people almost go to blows because of where they sat on that political spectrum. Or even today, during George Floyd. There is people, again, this is the elephant in the room, that are ready to go into blows based on how they feel about this particular incident.
Yeah.
So again, for some reason, law enforcement could do a better job of touching that aspect of the cultural things that exist in law enforcement. Not saying either side is right or wrong, but it exists. And where you sit on that fence could determine your rise to the top or your lack thereof.
Yep.
Ooh, man. And we're going to continue this on. We're not jumping. We're not even going to pivot anywhere else. I want to continue on this particular path, not any particular case or another, but when we talk about culture and law enforcement, sometimes it's hard to explain to other groups what that actually means. So while law enforcement in itself is very high stressed and the way people view it depends on what group you're in, you even have another layer of stress added. And it ain't just blacks, it's women, it's Latinos, it's people from the LGBT community. They have another layer. We all have another layer that you have to combat. So one thing that law enforcement has really started to focus on more, and I know this is another layer that isn't being focused on, but as a whole, we're starting to focus on more mental wellness and the officer wellness side. And this is why I love my podcast and I love being on different podcasts with different people. I never thought about the layer of being from another group on top of being in law enforcement. Like, I just never thought about it till now. And I'm sure I've talked about it or like mentioned it in passing. But when we're looking at officer wellness, mental wellness, there's one thing to be a cop. It's one thing to be a border patrol agent. It's one thing to be a federal agent and be beat up by the public. But now you're getting beat up by the public for the uniform, but you're also being beat up by the public based on your physical appearances or your beliefs. From your guys' experiences, obviously you guys started early on in the 80s, 90s. You guys had a lot of time there, but you guys are still in the industry and you guys are still doing work in the industry, even with the George Floyds around here. How have you guys been able to manage some of this stress? Because I don't think anybody's really talking about what we just brought up. Nobody that I can remember. So let me clarify. That's just Michael Laitler's knowledge of the industry. Nobody's talking about actual minorities or different groups' mental wellness in law enforcement. So for you guys, and whoever wants to take it first, jump in, but how have you guys handled some of this stress?
Mark, you want to jump in and I'll kind of back you up?
Yeah. You're right, Michael. I don't think that those of us of color have, I guess, roundtabled this topic or connected as a group, kind of going through the same thing. I don't think that we have done a good job connecting and mentoring and guiding and things like that. I'm on topic. Just let me take a quick left here.
Go ahead.
Post retirement, I was at the gym and I saw this Vinny, you're familiar with this term, this dark green gentleman. So in the Marine Corps, Michael, everyone is green. You're either light green or dark green, right? So that can transfer into the sheriff's department too, because we all wear tan and green, right? So I would tend to refer to my colleagues or somebody along those lines as dark green or light green, right? So this dark green black gentleman was in the gym. He looked over at me. I looked at him. I'm like, wow, that guy looks familiar. Long story short, it was one of our senior executives on the department who had recently retired as well. We started talking. I'm like, hey, I'm connected to you on LinkedIn. I know your name. I know your career, blah, blah, blah. I've never worked for you, but this is how I know you. So as we talked a little longer, he paused and he looked at me. He's like, man, where have you been for 30 years? Okay. So I took that as a compliment, Michael. I took that as he thought that I was one of those individuals that could have done some things on the department, although he wasn't aware of me. Now, on the sheriff's department, I can't speak for the federal agencies. I can't speak for LAPD or any other police departments, but I know on the sheriff's department, I was made aware that there's a group of dark green men in upper echelon positions that, because there is this thing, and we're touching on it, but there's this thing of exclusion based on color sometimes, we get passed over, right? And then if you're strong, then you're considered, recalcitrant, or you're just not a team player, and a lot of those types of things. So when he said that to me, I thought to myself, well, you're a mentor on this department. I'm just a lowly deputy, a lowly detective. And every time I stepped in front of anybody, regardless of uniform or not, I considered myself an ambassador, not an ambassador just to law enforcement, but to Black men or for Black men. I took it as my responsibility to try and, help remove some of those myths about Black men. I took it as my very own personal, right? So I would overtip a lot. I would do a lot of those things to kind of debunk those traditional things that, Black men do X, Y, and Z, right? So again, coming full circle, this executive said, "Where have you been?" Blah, blah, blah. And to me, it was very clear what he was saying. And that is, why didn't I discover you, or where were you? I could have done some cool stuff for you. Anyway, we don't do a good job at addressing ourselves, each other, I would, how when we walk down the street, Black men walk down the street, we look at each other, we give each other the head nod, right? Okay, well,
wait, Mark. So
am I divulging a secret here?
Yeah, no. So my ex-wife, she's white, and when we first started dating early on, like, she didn't get it. Like, I had to tell her. I said, "Hey, yeah. I'm gonna tell you something. You're gonna be very surprised when I tell you this." I said, "Watch every Black male I walk past, we're all gonna give each other the head nod." She said, "No, you don't do that. No." And mind you, like, me, this is her, this is me. This was back in like 06, 07 when we first started dating. And she started watching. She said, "Oh, you're serious? Everywhere you go, they give you a head nod." I said, I don't know why. That's what we do.
That's what we do.
It was funny because, and I've had to say it to other people in the culture, is just, I said, watch. I said, when two Black men walk past each other, it don't matter if we know each other. We may not be handshake, but we gonna say, "Hey, what's up?" Or
"What's
up?"
Yeah.
Hey, you doing all right, brother? But it's just funny. But I thought it was just a Florida, Texas thing, but apparently they do it in Cleveland, New York, and California.
Everywhere. Everywhere. Yeah. I think Michael, they actually started it in New York, in the Bronx, but when it came to Cleveland, we just kind of made it a little better. That's all. It's a different.
He had a slide with it, but my bad, Mark. I had to say, like, when you said it, it just popped in my head. I was like, I gotta tell, because every time I tell people this, like, it takes so. Even Black women don't always believe when I say it. They're just like, "No, Black men." Yes, Black men do this. Yes, I don't know what. Yeah. It's in the DNA. You learn it's in the DNA somewhere. I don't know, and I'm sure there's some historical like reason that it probably came out. I don't know, but it is definitely an unwritten like action and behavior that's done. But sorry, go ahead, Mark. Sorry,
no. And similar to your experience, my current wife, she's Hispanic, and when we got together in 02, 03-ish, again, I had to make her aware of some of the challenges that she's going to face being with me. Mm-hmm. And one of those, of course, I introduced her to the head nod. That was a good thing. But the other side I introduced her to is I said, "Okay, so watch. When we go into this restaurant, we're probably going to get seated in the back, even though there's like 900 seats on the window, right? The beautiful view. We'll probably get seated in the back next to the bathroom or next to the door to the kitchen." And sure enough, and it opened her eyes, right? So what I was going to say about that is simply this, is that I felt it was so important to mentor, to be a good ambassador, to be, that person standing in the middle of the divide of, well, you can't be a good brother because you're a cop, which means, you've sold out to the other side. You're not with us anymore. You're over here now, right? So what I attempted to do, Michael and Vinny, is just simply just be a good ambassador, be an upright dude, be a fair dude. I'm not going to go any direction for race. I'm not going to go any direction because of color. I'm going to, again, attempt to keep it down the center. What's right is right. What's wrong is wrong, right? But yeah, that's, and again, at this point, Michael, 20 minutes into answering your question, I don't even know if I answered your question, but I wanted to say that, so I said it. There it is.
Go. No, I like it. Go ahead, Vinny. Go ahead. Bring him back home. Bring him home.
So, I want to add on to what Mark was talking about, like a mentorship. Spot on. As you're telling that story, I'm trying to think who this person could be, and I kind of probably think I know who this person is, but I won't.
Yeah.
I won't bust them out on this podcast.
I'm sure you do. Yeah.
Just because it's lacking in, not, I wouldn't say not only LA Sheriff's Department, because certainly don't want to condemn them, but probably other law enforcement agencies. Sometimes we get so wrapped around being in the car. That's the term we use in LA for like being on that path to greatness versus being kicked out of the car. And we try to align. When I say we, I'm talking about like Black folk. We try to align ourselves to be in the car.
Yep.
Even though the car might not look like us, because we collectively don't have that power to have our own car and drive the car forward. Now, there's been attempts to do that, but it's not the same as it's like driving a Bentley, that's the car of choice, or driving a Honda Civic. We might be driving a Honda Civic, but the Bentley, everybody looks at the Bentley, and that's where they go to when they're looking at a car. So we only have the power to drive the Honda Civic, so to speak. So having said that, I think our mentorship has really been lacking to propel people to get into those right circles and right cars, which is unfortunate. And I'm going to tell a story. And again, I too have paid my penance for my misgivings, so to speak, within LASD. And there's a time when I'm deciding on my fate based on some incidents that actually kind of panned out in my favor, but I got kicked out of the car. Not that I was like really in the car. I got kicked out of the car like quickly, because once there's an air of you not doing the right thing, they certainly, those that are driving the Bentley, kick you out of the car quick. So from that, when I finally found out what my fate was, which is really nothing, had a choice to make. I'm probably about midway in my career, 14 years in my career. And it's just funny about like people. When at the time I was working training bureau, had a great job, and that job you're hand selected for. And that's one of those jobs where you're expected to promote. So this is during my turmoil that's going on in my life with the department. And people that I trusted, knew, felt were my road dogs were the same people trying to get my job, because it's like sharks in the water. They hear Vince Plair's in trouble, so let me get that job so I can be on that path to greatness. So again, from that I learned, okay, do I take this and be bitter for the latter half of my career, or do I take that and try to propel others to get some things that I couldn't get? And that's the path that I chose. And that's why I decided to do some other things outside of LASD to propel me to get back to not only LASD, but just people in general. That's why I teach on the side, because it's just so meaningful for me as a Black man to mentor folks. Even to this day, even though I don't work for LASD, I'm still in people's ears about like things they should do, how to get in that car and not sell themselves out, so to speak. So again, we have to do better at giving back. And someone told me that it's not about you; it's about what you can do for others. I think I'm in the latter stages of my life in a sense. I feel I'm riding a bike downhill, and I've been thinking a lot about my legacy. What legacy do I want to leave when I leave this earth? Is it the legacy that I was in the car and I got propelled to the top and stepped on people, or is it the legacy that I helped people achieve far more than I could achieve? So that's the legacy when I'm gone that I want to leave my family, my kids.
So I love that. I love the word legacy. I love having that, because it is so important. And we talk about like generational awareness. We talk about generational like giving and how to grow legacies and build people after us. So for you, Vincent, this started somewhere. This didn't start when you went through a hard time. You had this mindset coming into this, because you're right. You were at that fork in the road where you could have said, oh, I hate everybody. I'm just going to go to mids and hide and spend the next 10 years doing nothing, or I can propel myself and keep building and mentoring. Where did that come from? Did you have mentors growing up yourself? Was it just your parents? Like part of being a human inside the uniform and out, it's good to know where that came. Like where did that come from for you?
I think for me, what really set my foundation for my work ethic and how I view a lot of things was the military. Just my story out of college, I was in a fraternity and I partied my way through school. And you know how you graduate cum laude, summa cum laude? I graduated thank you laude. Like I barely got.
What fraternity was that? Which fraternity?
I'm an Alpha Phi Alpha.
Alpha Phi Alpha. Okay.
So I barely graduated from school, but going into the Marine Corps, really, I think it gave me the work ethic that I still use today. As a 2-year-old, you know, you're given a lot of responsibility, and it's either going to make or break you, especially being in the Marine Corps. It's a competitive environment. I think a lot more competitive than, say, the Sheriff's Department, but in a less backstabbing way, I should say. I mean, not that the military is perfect. They certainly have their fair share of racial scandals, but I think the scales for achieving greatness are even more balanced than they are, say, within the Sheriff's Department. A lot of internal stuff working in law enforcement that, like I talked about, like the two scales of the duality in cultures exist. You know, the backstabbing that goes on in law enforcement. In today's current landscape, you know, there's a lot of talk about like the public doesn't trust police, the police don't trust the public, so on and so forth. But during that time, I felt like my own folks didn't trust me. You know, I didn't have any issues with the community, but I had internal issues with folks that I was working around. I never know who to trust. Because again, when I was going through my little stuff with the department, sharks in the water, people trying to get my job. You know, I had people telling the executives about my fate. So it was just kind of an ugly time for me, but I bounced back, and I think I'm all the better. And I think, not to get into like spirituality, everything happens for a reason, right?
Yes, it does.
I don't think I was meant to be a police chief or an executive. I was meant to do what I'm doing now and focusing on my legacy and making like people better versus like, you know, retiring with like a bigger paycheck. I mean, the money's good, but again, what's your legacy?
Well, what about you, Mark? Like what obviously you've been through different trials and tribulations. Obviously, we talked about the O.J. Simpson trial earlier and where you were at the time of that. How have you been able to bounce back and be resilient and just have that level of understanding that failure is not the end of everything? Like where did that come from for you?
Interesting question. I kind of I think I tend to agree with Vinny. And just so you know, I'm the only person that can call him Vinny, just so you know. Am I right, Vinny?
That is true. That is
okay.
True.
All right. My mother, the traditional single black female in Cleveland doing her thing, I watched her scuffle, bouncing me around the family for, I got some overtime, or, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And, now we need to find, somebody to watch little Marky. Right. So I think it started with my mom. Moving forward, like Vinny had just said, I tell people that the Marine Corps actually saved me. It instilled a level of discipline in me and a level of, listen, if I put my mind to it, if it's reasonable, if I put my mind to it, I can achieve these things. And prior to that, all I had done on a successful level was wrestled in high school and played football. I thought I did both of those things very well. So once I went to the Marine Corps, I was kind of a blank slate looking for a direction. And I think the Marine Corps, my mom passed the baton to the Marines. The Marine Corps broke me down, rebuilt me, and turned me into something different. And I think the core of that, Michael, was the discipline that it instilled in me. It definitely, and again, I think Vinny can attest to this, it definitely made me stand out in the crowd as far as, pride. Like I said, I owned the responsibility of being just the best man that I could possibly be. I fall short, of course, but the thought of, again, representing not only law enforcement, representing Black men, positive Black men doing the right thing, those are very important with me. And again, I think that's a part of legacy building as well. But to come around full circle, I just think that my mom and the Marine Corps, those are the ones that, had the greatest influence on me as far as, and again, this is an Army phrase, being all I could be.
As I sit and listen to both of you guys, I was never in the military, but I have appreciated everything I've seen, especially when it comes to leadership training. And I've noticed how well they've done it because, like you said, at 2021, you're already over major groups of people, especially if you're deployed or you're in a situation where you're put out another, like a bigger, like you have, like, you're not dealing with two people. You're over 30, 40, sometimes a couple of hundred, depends on your MOS or your job assignment. So
Right.
when we look at military leadership training and some of the law enforcement training you guys have been through when it comes to leadership, how do you think, or do you think that it's possible to bring some of that, not military style thinking, but how do we, because military's been doing it for a long time, for decades, centuries, however you want to look at it. How do we start to incorporate some of that discipline into the civilian law enforcement side? Like, is there a way, is that you guys think it's possible to kind of strengthen the leadership training, like, especially based on how the military does it, but in law enforcement?
I think I'm going to kind of answer this from like an officer perspective. Is they drill in you day one to learn not only your job, but the job of a person like two ranks ahead of you. So there's this constant training that goes on with that mindset. So when you're a lieutenant, they want you to think like a captain. When you're a captain, they want you to think like a major lieutenant colonel. And that's just the cultural mindset of the organization. Plus, in terms of promotions, you can't get promoted unless you go to certain schools, which are like leadership-based schools. So you're continually evolving and learning with that mindset. I think in law enforcement, what's I see is a lacking. Yes, there's a lot of training, but you could be, excuse my phrase, Joe Shit the Rag Man one day, working patrol, and you take a test and you score well on the test and you're promoted. And I've talked to countless people. Well, I'm just taking this promotion because of the money. It's not part of the organizational culture to be competitive for promotion. You have to attend certain schools. You don't have to go to school one in law enforcement to get promoted. You just have to pass a test.
Correct. That's true.
And I think that ends up biting organizations in the butt long term because they make supervisors that are not as strong as the organization probably wants them to be. So I think that mindset needs to change a little bit. I mean, I'm sure there's been a lot of discussions. I'm sure agencies have looked at a lot of different models, but I think that's missing. And I'm sure there's union issues. There's a whole lot of issues. Law enforcement will tell you why they can't do that. But in order to be the best, you have to culturally think like the best.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I'm not sure where this stands at this point, but there was at one time the Sherman Block School of Leadership. Do you remember they rolled that out? Well,
it still exists.
It still exists.
The internal one or the one, there's a post one, there's an internal one that LASD started but stopped.
That was the one I was referring to.
Yeah.
The internal one.
Right.
And I went to one of the courses when we had a lull in movement in the department. And like I said, I came on a department thinking I'm I wasn't interested in promotion. I just wanted to be a career investigator, take that as high as I could take it. But what was really eye-opening and changing during the course of that whole process was just, I don't know, it was just one of those things that once you really took the fact that, okay, I'm going to promote, I'm going to do this new thing, and they send you someplace like the leadership training, right? This moment in my career, I was thinking, okay, it's time to promote. Let's put on the sergeant stripes. Let's move up. Maybe my career isn't my career. Maybe there's something out there that's different or better for me. So long story short, when they sent me to this leadership school, it was a 40-hour course. And I'm going to be very honest with you. Out of that 5-day course, there was one thing that I took with me, and it was the last hour of the class, of the training. And there was a captain there who kind of closed everything out. He opened and then he closed, and I can't remember his name. But he said one thing. He says, own your leadership. He says, if I could leave you with one thing, guys, he said, own your leadership. Now, owning your leadership, of course, that could be, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But what I took it as is that, being a leader meant that my troops are my responsibility. Their well-being is my responsibility. Of course, you could lead a horse to water. I get all that. But bottom line, I felt like that was my responsibility. These are my members of my team. This is my responsibility to make sure that they go home every night. Kind of like a field training officer, right? You got somebody that has to go home every night, and it's your responsibility to make sure they get there. So when this captain said, own your leadership, it meant a couple things. And one of the big things I remembered is that I wished at that moment that the leadership training that we received from the Sheriff's Department was as strong as what I received in Marine Corps boot camp. I am personally not a Vietnam era Marine, but my leadership, when I got to the Marine Corps in '84, they were all Vietnam era Marines, right? So I got a taste of the old school and I got a taste of the new school as I move forward in my career in the Marine Corps. And it's just, there's a commonality in all Marines that, again, like Vinny had said, they put you in a position of leadership very early. Mm-hmm. And there is no question. You either own it or you don't. So when that captain said that in that class, like I said, it was a 40-hour course. And the only thing I took away from that 40 hours was just that phrase. And similar to what Vinny had said earlier, I've used that moving it forward, in my career, but it is definitely lacking some level of military-based leadership. I think should be instituted in law enforcement, I mean, we had the ability when we were carrying guns out there, we had the ability to take a life. So why not do all that we could as far as supplying our leaders with everything that we possibly can to make the best possible decisions that we can, So I hope that answered your question clear.
But to kind of add on to that, again, not to compare, but I'm going to compare, is per post, California post, when you promote to, first line, sergeant, lieutenant, you're mandated within a time frame to attend a 40-hour course, and that's it. So you could be a sergeant for 10, 15 years, 5 years, whatever, or a lieutenant the same amount of time. You're not mandated to go to any other leadership training. There is no continual leadership training that you have to go to. Let's flip the gears to the Marine Corps. It's different. You have to go to continual leadership training to be competitive. So it's either sink or swim there in the Marine Corps. The analogy they use is it's lonely at the top. There's a lot of room at the bottom, but as you go up the scale, it gets lonelier and lonelier and lonelier because people start falling off the tree because they just can't. They just don't rise to the level that what the Marine Corps wants or any service wants. All the services are kind of similar in the way that they train their leaders. It's different, There's got to be. I believe, obviously, a lot of folks in law enforcement have made mistakes, but I think a lot of those mistakes could have been prevented if the leaders that are supervising folks are a little bit stronger.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying we're not doing a good job, but we have to be creative and move with the times to continually get better.
No, you're right. And you guys, I love the strategy of, and I didn't think about it. Actually, I've been thinking about a lot of things until we started talking about it tonight. But having leadership training before they get into leadership roles. One thing I faced when I went from an officer to a lieutenant was I'd have leadership training, not formal training, for about almost a year. So although I had done some training, I had a master's degree at the time, so I'd done some stuff on my own, but formerly I hadn't had anything, and I was leading people. I was leading shifts. I was making decisions. I was giving feedback. I was delegating. I was coming up with people's career plans, or trying to at least. But that was all just things I learned on my own. So that might be something that people and agencies should look at, like, hey, while you take this assessment, maybe part of your assessments or the points, maybe you take some type of leadership training. Now, on the flip side, that agency is going to have to be able to provide it. I think that's what I think that's where they start to get a little edgy about, because they have to pay for this training. Military already has it set up to where if you're going to go from E2 to E3, you have to have X, Y, Z training. Like you said, you have to have continuous education to promote in the military. Law enforcement, I guess we just have to figure out how we can prepare leaders to be leaders. And part of those assessments, part of the resume is, if you don't have a leadership training, 40 hours or whatever number it might be, you're just not eligible. And I think that will alleviate a lot of the issues you see, especially early on. A lot of the burnouts that leaders get, because you're going to quickly realize that this may not be for you. So while you're trying to take this test and make this money may not be your answer. That stress that you're about to get when you have to deal with people's problems, it's good to know that, or really truly know that, versus you shouldn't really be sinking in leadership like out the gate. You shouldn't be like trial by error, because you have people's lives in your hands. When you're dictating their schedule, when you're giving them orders, when you're giving them assignments, you literally have their lives in your hands, because they're looking at you for guidance. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're just winging it. So I think you guys are 100% right. There should be that training ahead of time to help improve leadership out the gate.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you guys are saying too. And I never considered this, but to me, this absolutely could be the difference in a lot of incidents, or negative, let me say negatively perceived incidents, right? It seems like we get the snippets, the before, then maybe a snippet in the middle, and then maybe something at the end. We never get, well, why did the officer have to come here in the first place, right? But I like what you guys are saying as far as continuing education, because like the Marine Corps, like you guys said, if you don't have a certain amount of courses, if you don't have a certain class in your resume, then like you said, it's cut and dry. You're just not eligible. And until you do that, you can do whatever you want to do, but until you do that, yeah, we're not going to have that conversation with you, because you haven't done what it takes to prepare. And I think the perfect example would be, yeah, let's get these guys and girls in some leadership courses, make them mandatory. If it's a college credit type thing, then let's do it that way. But I think if you're going to want to promote, to have to pay for some of these training, classes or courses or certifications or whatever out of your pocket, I think it's an investment in your future. So I don't think it's too much to ask you to say, listen, you need these 3 courses. They're on you. But if you don't have them, you're not considered eligible, So that, like you said earlier, it's going to cause the people that really want to promote, hopefully for the right reasons, because they want to be leaders and they want to change things in a positive way. The ones that aren't, and they're just looking for the paycheck increase, the 2%, the 5% or whatever, those are the ones that can kind of go back to custody and diddy bop around there and do whatever they need to do and just get out of the way,
No, yeah, I agree. So for you guys, as you guys are, obviously you guys are like me, you guys have invested in yourself well before other people probably had to. And I think it's important for people to realize that in order for you to grow, you do got to spend a little money on yourself. If you wait for your agency, you wait for your organization, it's just not going to happen. Let's just call it what it is. They're going to pay for you to learn how to drive better. They're going to make sure you know how to qualify with your handgun. They're going to make sure you know how to do report writing. But when it comes to your own growth and you paving that future and you're getting to that path of greatness, you're going to have to spend a little bit of money on yourself. And if you think it's not worth it, then maybe it's not worth for you to get into that role. So for you guys didn't just stop when you retired. You guys went from law enforcement to transitioning into other organizations. So a lot of that I know started early on, meaning that you guys, as you trained yourself and you took outside stuff, you realized the importance of getting ready to leave at some point. So for you guys, how was that transition going from law enforcement to the private sector?
Wow, that's a great question. So for me, I told a story about basically being kicked out of the car and had to come to this realization that although I came on this department aspiring to seek great heights, it just wasn't going to happen. So how do I retool myself? Because I know I have a lot to give, and now I'm on this mentorship path now. So that's when I really started investing in myself for that day when I retired, because I knew I wanted to do something else, and finish my master's and eventually received a doctorate, all because of Uncle Sam, so to speak. I guess all those nights I spent getting shot at in Kuwait paid off, because it got me a few degrees. So
It did.
no, it was off. It was not for naught, right? I mean, I'm using it for good. So that's what I used to propel me to do some of the things. And then when I got my master's, I was kind of on the, unlike Mark, I wasn't like an investigator. That wasn't like my get down, so to speak. I was more in the training aspect of things. And I love teaching. That Sherman Block course, I was one of the trainers. I taught that course for a while, and I love teaching. So I wanted to teach part-time, and I absolutely fell in love with it from like day one. And that's where I really found my mojo, so to speak. That's where I really started to retool myself. I said, this is it for me. This is what I want to do when I retire. Still continue to do some things in the sheriff's department, but in my mind, I'm saying I'm doing these outside things for my future. I'm doing LASD for now because it's paying the bills. I'm a good supervisor. I aspire to mentor people while in the sheriff's department, but I knew probably about year 15, this is the path that I wanted to be on. Now I end up not teaching full time. That's a whole nother story. But I still teach, part-time at a few schools. And that's where I find my greatest joy in terms of mentoring. And I have to say, I have students now that are in doctorate programs. I have students now that are working for various law enforcement agencies, federal agencies. I have students that have, advanced degrees that I still keep in contact with because I've laid that foundation with them. And again, this runs no particular race. I have students of all ethnicities, male, female, that still, contact me for like advice and stuff. So to me, there is no greater, there's greater joy, but that is a great joy of mine. And that's part of my legacy now. And that foundation again was set right around year 15 when I figured out that, hey, this is not going to happen for me. One door is closed. I got to open up another door. There's a phrase that I like to use. It's called "the hustle is real." Again, this is the New York in me. You got to create opportunities. One door shuts, you got to get out there and hustle and make an opportunity present itself to you. So that's kind of like my story and my path and how I transitioned from one career to teaching. Then my job with the Department of Justice now, this has kind of fell into my lap based on some of my skill sets and things that my particular agency needed. So kind of fell in my lap too. So again, opportunities present themselves based on, again, that work ethic that I talked about. If I didn't have that drive and that hustle, wouldn't have happened.
What about you, Mark? How did all this go down for you? I mean, because you could easily just retired and went into the sunset and just lived on the beach, but you didn't.
Yeah. I'm still in contact with a couple executive members on the department. And one of them told me recently, he's like, he retired from the LA Sheriff's and he went on to be a chief at one of the local agencies out here in Southern California. He's since retired from that and he came back and he realized, oh, Mark's doing this thing, right? He's a director of corporate security for a pretty large company. So he approached me and we were having this conversation. And one of the things that he said that stuck with me, he was like, Mark, if you ever need an investigator, now this is a chief on our department, right? So it was interesting. He says, Mark, if you ever need an investigator to go out and do like, what is it, private investigating work for you, he says, I still have that fire in my belly, right? So when I left law enforcement, and I've come to accept this. And Vinny, I think you've heard this story before, but the 30-second version of the story is when I retired, I for about 4 or 5 months, my wife and I would be out having dinner. I could be changing a flat on the car. I could be cleaning the run for the dog, right? And all of a sudden I would just start to cry. I didn't understand what was going on with me. As time went on, I realized that there were some questions in my head that weren't answered at that point. One was, I've been a giver to people. I've served people for 34 years straight. So now that that's gone, I'm no longer a deputy. I'm not an active duty Marine. The question was, well, who am I now? So like Vinny said, I had to kind of recreate myself to a certain degree. I had to now transition my law enforcement knowledge and or expertise into the private sector. Well, the natural transition would be somewhere in the security or investigative side of private sector, right? So that's where I landed. But I will say that it's an interesting transition. My first stop in post-retirement was with Monster Energy. I was their intellectual property investigator, corporate investigator, blah, blah, blah. So I protected the Monster mark, right? My very first meeting, they asked me a question, and I'm brand new to this environment. Now, this is a Google-esque vibe type environment, flip-flop shorts, right? So I go into this room with about 25 people. We have this meeting, and at one point they call on me to answer a question about cargo theft. And I answered the question, and then along the lines, I said, blah, blah, blah. And the vehicle would be described as this, right? So I look to my left, and these two girls in the meeting, they start to laugh. I giggled. I looked over, I'm like, well, crap, what did I say that could have caused it? Well, yeah. I used the word vehicle. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's the lowest level of things that you have to be conscious of when you transfer from law enforcement to the private sector. But there's a lot. I kind of describe it as, the barrel racing with horses, where they sprint and all of a sudden they hit a barrel and they got to go around it and then they go. Well, that's kind of, to me, the transition that I had to take. I really had to, take myself and humble myself first and foremost. Law enforcement doesn't always transfer into the private sector. So you kind of have to find a way to make it transfer over into the private sector. And that's currently what I'm doing. But it's an interesting transfer, Michael. And if you're open and you have the energy to do it, it's worth it. But I'm going to tell you, it is something that it's a thing. There is an obstacle there. There is challenges there. But if you're game and you're down, it's a very solid position, because you are going to get to a comfort zone in it. And you're going to say to yourself, well, wait a minute. I'm not being asked to protect the community. I'm not being asked to, take 16 people to jail tomorrow. I'm not asked to run somebody down with a gun or drive 90 miles an hour down the street or whatever. I'm being asked to investigate something from a human resources perspective. You know what I'm saying? So once you start to settle into what your focus is and what you're here to accomplish, then that transition actually starts to become easier every day that you involve yourself. So
I want to add on to that. Great points, Mark. This is why I really love teaching, is when you're in spaces with students that don't understand the police culture, the police lingo, and you're looking at their faces and they're looking at like, what you just say, Willis, kind of thing. It makes you like, okay, I want to be relatable, so I got to find a way to reach them on their level. And that's not like talking like a police officer. And when I first started teaching, I did just that. I came across very police-like. And now I teach graduate courses as well, one of the schools I teach at. And these are organizational leadership classes. And none of them come from law enforcement. They're all like private sector jobs. And I can't talk cop lingo to them because they don't understand that. And I wouldn't be a very good adjunct professor if I talk like that. So I have to talk their talk. I have to reach them where they are, which is not cop-like. So I've gone through that transition too, to the point now where I think it's easier for me, even though I'm still in law enforcement. So even when I'm in law enforcement circles, I try not to come off cop-like because I'm not a cop anymore. I am what I am for Department of Justice. And I don't want them to think that I am that, because the agency I work for, we have to be unbiased.
Two things we hit on very strongly. We talked about mentorship, and we talked about the transition from law enforcement to the private sector. For both of you guys, if you went back to when you were 5 years in into the police world, what would you mentor that 5-year police officer on right now if they came up to you and said, man, I've been thinking lately, what am I going to do in retirement or when I leave this agency? Like, what would you tell them to start doing now to get ready for that?
Gonna go, Mark?
Yeah. That's a great question, Michael. One of the things when I bump into young deputies and young officers today, now post-retirement, one of the things I ask them is, first of all, how long you been on? And of course that varies, but normally it's it's under 10 or right around 10 or 12 years. My follow-up is always the same. Start preparing for retirement, right? Now, it doesn't mean you have to start stacking cash in your safe deposit box under your bed or things like that. Get 6 shotguns. What it simply means is there should be a portion of your journey that you're reserving for preparation for retirement. It's like the NFL. You can go out and have a great game on Sunday and then walk out of the locker room and fracture your ankle in 16 places and your career is done, right? Law enforcement is very similar because it's so, it's a physical job. I should say the lower levels are very physical, right? So if I could grab myself by the shoulders, when I was 5 years in, I would think it would be, at some point you need to start preparing and thinking about retirement and how you want to walk out the door, whether it's rank, whether it's position, whether it's legacy, whatever you want to do. And then the second thing would just be always just stay humble and listen, stay humble and learn. And like we were talking about earlier, and I'll stop at this point, but what we were talking about earlier about mentorship, we just don't do a good job. So one of the things that I decided that I wanted to do is I wanted to be a mentor to young deputies. And it was regardless of race. It was just that I think the young deputies out there just don't get the opportunity to be exposed to things that, like we were talking before, you get promoted next week. Okay, you're in the fire. That's it, right? It's up to you to determine what you want to be, how you want to do it, blah, blah, blah. Well, I just don't think we prepare ourselves good for that. So what I decided to do is make sure I prepared the young deputies that I came in contact. I would give them responsibilities, even though they weren't investigators. I would help them, or I would teach them how to write search warrants while they were still in patrol. I would teach them interviewing skills while they were still in patrol. There were situations where I would actually go out and say, listen, if your boss will allow you to participate in this search warrant, you can come with me and work with me for the next 2 days. I'll show you what prep looks like. I'll show you what post looks like. I'll show you what the boilerplate looks like and how you need to tweak it based on what type of items you're looking for or persons or whatever. So that was my thing, is just making sure I mentor people. So I guess the answer to that portion would be, I would also seek out mentorship.
Yep.
Last piece. I interviewed for DOPE while I was at Carson. Well, we still had Compton at that point. When I was at Compton, I interviewed for DOPE 3 times. I was taking all the guns to jail on graveyards, on earlies. I was taking all the bad guys to jail. I was taking all the guns, most pursuits, most fights, everything. So I was like, how can I be denied? I interviewed 3 times and didn't get it 3 times. I went to one of my guru supervisors and I said, listen, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to try dope again. He says, how many times is this now? I said, 4. He says, who did you tell you were interviewing for dope the first 3 times? I said, nobody. He says, you're a dumbass.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So my point is, I think mentorship would have been something at the 5-year point that if they wouldn't have approached me, I would approach them and say, listen, tell me what you got. How did you get where you are? What do I need to get from point A to point B? Right. So I think those are the things that I would look for.
So great story. I'm going to tell a similar story. So I interviewed for our SWAT team, SCB, 7 times and never got selected. And kind of got the same sort of story. Who did you tell? Well, nobody, because I don't really know anybody.
Yep, same thing.
And my response was, this is why you're not going to ever get there, because you don't know anybody. So there's rules to this game that are written in policy, and there's rules to this game that will never be written in policy that folks 5 years in just really don't understand. And I know I didn't understand it. I just thought that me coming in, I'm gonna work harder than the next guy. I got the education, I got the military background, and poof, I'm gonna ride that train to the top. And then year 14, then you really learn there's some damn rules to this game that I just didn't know about. These other folks, 7, 10 years, they know because they are connected to people that know the rules to the game. So, again, you'll never see that in the textbook. You'll never see that anywhere, but it's fact. That's as the young folk would say, that's real talk right there.
Yeah.
So, like Mark, I would kind of do the same thing. First of all, you got to be, what's the saying in the Marine Corps? You have to be technically competent is a term they use. Technically proficient. You got to know your job. That's first off, because no one wants to vouch for someone that doesn't know their job. Know your job, and again, look down the line. I'll tell you another story. So, in fact, I never really care for this person. He works homicide now for LA County Sheriff's Department, and he's about to meet his fate because he did something, stupid. I don't know what happened in the end. And he and I having this conversation, and I'm basically talking him off the ledge because he's like not doing too well. And basically he says, like, if I lose this job, I don't know what I'm going to do because I haven't prepared myself to do anything else. So to me, that was like wow, the light bulb came on. But I'd already started on that line to prepare myself to do other things. So again, going back to my mentorship, I'm really on this kick now to tell people, hey, you got to prepare yourself day one. When you're just like the Marine Corps, you get that job, start thinking about that next job, even though it might come 2 or 3 years later. And then once you get that next job, start thinking about that next job. You got to stay ahead of the game, and you got to learn the rules, what truly the rules of the game are. I mean, when someone told me, if you don't know the rules of the game, you can't play the game. Like playing football and you don't know the rules. You're gonna get slaughtered, right? Okay, and it happens typically in law enforcement.
Yep. Hey, and to piggyback on that, that whole unwritten policy and procedures manual that you're referring to. During the course of my career, I thought I did one thing very well. I thought I interviewed well. I got a lot of admissions, and I would do my homework, and I would prep for interviews, and I'd set traps and things like that to get admissions and things like that. So anyway, as time went on, I realized that there was another aspect of interviewing that was very important. And we talk about going in our own pocket and getting training. Well, that's what I did for interviewing. I did level 1, level 2, and then I took this other course that the FBI did. It's actually called the SCAN technique, where the normal interviewing process, you're taught to detect the lie, right? Well, in the SCAN technique, they teach you how to detect the truth. Everything that's left is the lie. Long story short, things like micro expressions, all those little nuanced things that we don't really discuss when we're talking about interviewing and interrogation. Well, I absolutely agree with what Vinny was saying. There is the policy and procedures manual in black and white. You shall do this and that. And then there's the unwritten version of the policy and procedures manual, which is the unspoken policy and procedures manual that we absolutely have to fall in line with to the letter of the law, because if you don't, you end up in positions where you kind of have to settle to a certain degree instead of, being able to reach the standard that you actually set out to reach. So anyway.
No, and you're right. You guys are both right. And it took me, I don't know if it was mentorship that helped me out, but at some point I realized that you had to combine hardworking and networking to move along in your career. You could be the hardest worker out there and you would never be seen. You could be the best networker out there, and then you're going to fail once you get in the position if you don't have that work ethic. So I tell people, like, when I am mentoring them, they're like, how's this person getting this? Or, you know what, I'm just going to work hard. And I tell them, and I'm very blunt with people. I'm like, you are a hard worker, but if you want to achieve anything, you got to meet people. You have to network. You have to find people that's not in your circle, that's not in the car. You have to find these people because you don't know who they have influence with. And you can be on these interview boards, interviewing amazing and trying to get in the drugs or trying to get in the SWAT. And if you knew one extra person in the process, it would have changed everything, because human nature is human nature. We like to be around people we know. That's just how it is. And if you interviewed, if you got at, let's say a number, if you did an 8 out of 10 interview, and the other person did an 8 out of 10 interview, but that person knew the person that was making the selection or knew someone that can connect them, that person right here is going to get it. The person on the side that has the network is going to get it over you, not because they're a better person than you. It's just because when all else is equal, networking is going to propel. Even if that person did a 7 and you did an 8, the fact that they knew somebody will make their interview almost a 9. That's just keeping it real. That's understanding the system. And it ain't just law enforcement. It's other industries. Just knowing people in the right spot goes a far way. So you guys knocked that one out the park. You guys are 100% right. And when I look at different things going on in law enforcement, I know people get frustrated. I know they get upset, and I know they don't want to brown nose, so to speak. It's brown nose is because that's what you call it. Everybody else calls it networking and relationship building. So if you have that mindset that you're calling it brown nosing, you're already beating yourself, because the other person's going to brown nose, if that's what you want to call it. They're going to, and they're going to get what they're going to achieve their goals, because they're making friends, they're building relationships, they're showing up to places that put them in front of other people.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And that reminded me of a story, very quick version of it.
Go ahead.
I felt as a detective, a station level detective, I felt like there are certain groups that we don't investigate, right? They're out there, but we don't investigate them for whatever reason. And I thought locally, the two groups that we don't investigate are the 1%ers, right? The fruit of Islam guys. And we don't investigate black bikers. So I'm just thinking to myself, well, what if I put something together and we can start dipping our toes in that water? Because the fruit of Islam guys, or the Islam guys, the converts, and of course not everyone that has done this, but it seems like the big percentage are the guys that converted in prison. It seems like those guys want to be viewed as righteous and worthy to be labeled a solid Muslim brother. So they're open to whatever the Muslim brothers say on the other side of the world. This is what we need you to do, so that we can find favor, right? And then we can kind of embrace you into the brotherhood, right? Well, there's a lot of bad things that these guys are doing to get that acknowledgement, to get that acceptance, and we're not investigating. So full circle, I'm talking to one of the guys, and he was like, hey man, do you know this? And I won't name names, but because actually I ended up having to investigate this person later in my career. Okay. But he said, do you know X? I said, I've been introduced, but it was more in passing. Well, this person, they're in the car. They know people, like people at the top, literally at the top. And he told me, he says, that's a great idea. And he says, I've never even heard that in a conversation. So maybe there's space to create a unit that would kind of look into one of those two different groups. He says, let me introduce you, because that person's here actually on the facility. Walked me over, introduced me, shook hands, blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, wait, your partner here said that you had an idea. Can you tell me what your idea was? So I told the idea. They said, okay, hang on one second. This is the flip phone days, the Motorola flip phone days, right? So this person opened up the flip phone, made a phone call, literally 5 minutes later, closed the phone and came back to me and said, okay, if you want to start this unit and your unit will let you go, we have a space for you. We can select a team for you, blah, blah, blah. So it was going to happen. So my point is this, just like what you guys had intimated earlier, it's not always the work ethic. Work ethic is part of it. I'm a firm believer in that, right? But it is definitely networking and getting out there and making people see that, you can be a part of a team. You will pull your weight. You're good in social settings as well. A lot of us with our teams, we get very close, we get personal. So I have something at my house, I'll bring my team over. Well, I don't want some dummy that's out there, not bathing and, not doing the right thing to come over to my house. Right. So understanding who you're dealing with is very important, and being social and networking, like you said, is very important. So yeah, I just thought that was a similar story to prove that point that, yeah, you got to know people.
Yeah, and I definitely. Oh, did you have something?
No, I was gonna say, add on to that. That's something again that I early in my career I really didn't do a good job of. So if I would have had to roll the clock back, I would definitely take this advice now, and maybe things could have been different for me. Not that things were bad, but I just didn't do it because, again, I didn't have any mentors on the department that said, "Hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z, or should be doing X, Y, and Z."
Yeah. My first 8 years, I didn't know what that meant. It wasn't until I really started taking a college course and start looking around my own situation. And I was like, why am I missing this? And literally, I could say the year I learned how to network, all types of doors opened up. Like, I want to say literally within the year, like it might've been, you know what? I'm going to take that back. It was within like 6 months, because I learned the power of networking, going to talk to the right people, and forcing myself into those circles that I just wasn't going to be introduced to. So like you guys are saying, when you're looking at mentoring, networking, hard work, it's all part of the process. It's all about growing. And when we have viewers on here that they might be feeling frustrated, or they're feeling upset because they don't have that level of growth. I mean, you got two guys here that are telling you, hey, you have to go out there and network. You have to build relationships. You have to find mentors. That's how you're going to overcome some of these hard things you're going through. And for people that are thinking about getting into law enforcement, when you get into it, start thinking about networking out the gate. Don't wait. Don't be like Michael Laitler and wait 8 years to figure it out, or start thinking about 15 years in. All right, what am I going to do next with my career? Think about it soon. Not saying you have to leave, but you have to have a plan. You have to have something in place that's going to get you to that next level, because you deserve it. You owe it to yourself to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a supervisor tell me once, he says, everybody called me Jack back then, Jackson, right? This supervisor, this guru, he told me, he says, hey, Jack, he says, the one thing that you need to make sure you keep in your back pocket, moving forward is, he says, yes, you've got a good network of people that care for you. He says, well, you have to be able to discern, and this attaches itself to what you said, talking to the right people. Mm-hmm. He says, you have to make sure you're listening to the room, you're able to discern who can hurt your career and who can support your career. He says, because association can also, kill your career. So you have to be cognizant of that as you're attempting to grow that social network, as you're attempting to network and things like that. So, it's just like, and I kind of parallel that to, how when we fire our weapon, we also are held accountable for everything in the backdrop as well, right? Wherever that bullet goes, we have to be accountable for it, which means in a nanosecond or less, if there's anything less than a nanosecond, we have to consider, if I use deadly force, where is that round going to impact? It's going to go through his body, 9mm, right? It's going to go through the body. Now, where is it going to go from there? So those things have to be considered. So I kind of liken that to growing your social network, growing your I guess your social sphere, right? Understanding who you're talking to and understanding where you need to categorize that person, how close you need. They're all things that you have to be considering as you move forward. I had a buddy tell me one time, why do you hang out with that dude? Right? A guy that I worked graveyard with, we had a great time in the field. We kept it light, but we were productive and we were grinders. And I just loved being around this guy. Although he didn't have the best work ethic, he didn't have the best reputation as far as, carrying his own weight. He was looked upon kind of as like a one-way kind of dude. If it's about me and that's it. And somebody asked me point blank, why do you hang around that guy? Right. So that's one of those instances where I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. Maybe this can negatively impact my career, my association with this dude. So actually I had to just consider or reconsider my relationship with this gentleman. So anyway, I think that's a part of it as well.
And another part of that is also while you're trying to figure out who your network is, pick people or try to align yourself with people that have your best interests in heart. Because like I said, sometimes things don't go well for you. You got piranhas trying to get to where you are or the job that you currently have. So you have to kind of be careful about that. But if you were to ask me, well, how do you figure that out? I don't really have an answer to that. You just have to be cognizant of like everybody that you think is your friend might not be your friend.
Very true.
And people are looking at your network. I mean, it's what it is. People are seeing who you associate with, and they are making their judgments, and it's just human nature. I mean, it's like we try to hide what people naturally think. Well, if you're hanging around with that person that's considered a scumbag, so to speak, he or she may not be that, but if that's what people's perception is, because that's the perception they want, that they allow people to have of them, then that's how they're going to look at you, especially if you guys are spending any duration of time. Y'all could have went to the convenience store together to go get some ice. They're like, oh, that person, yep, that's how Mark is. He's that person all of a sudden. And it's not really like that, but it's human nature. So you're right. You have to kind of look at your circle. You have to look at the people around you and figure out what kind of opinion you want, because it can dictate your professional career. I mean, it's really there.
Yep, absolutely.
I had executives tell me that as you go along in your career, wherever you go, your reputation goes with you. So when you apply for a job, even though they don't know who you are, they know about your reputation from others. So, and I learned, was a PIO for a time, and I learned that like your particular agency is a brand, and to kind of dial that in. I mean, you're a brand, and you got to protect your brand. Your brand could be not viewed upon good, like Twitter or X, what do they call it these days? Or it could be looked upon as like a brand that everybody wants to be a part of.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. So as we round out the episode, I know, like I told you guys before, there's not a lot of script. Now I love the dog. That's what I love. Just the random. The dog's like, hey, you've been on this podcast too long. Mark, he's like, I've been quiet. I haven't gone outside. I've been kind of walking around the background.
Yeah, but he's been a good boy.
He's been quiet though. I'll give him that. If the viewers were looking to connect with you guys later, like what would be the best way for them to reach you guys?
I'm on LinkedIn. Look me up. Vincent Plair. I'm pretty vanilla, so to speak. My LinkedIn page.
Same with me. LinkedIn would probably be the best way. Mark with a C, Jackson.
Okay, so LinkedIn for both guys. So if you guys really, I'll tell you guys, if you guys are looking for mentorship, you could tell based on both voices and both mindset that you guys have heard. They're even with things they have going on in their lives, their mindset is still for growth, guys, and they want to see people get better because they believe in the industry. And that's what it's all about. That's what it is about the LEO First podcast. We're bringing people on here that no matter where they're at in their career, they want to see growth. They want to see people get better. And that's what we want too. That's what I want. I can tell you, just speaking for myself, I want to see this industry continue to grow, because out of all the hard things we go through, it's good to know you have support and continue support from all around the country. And you guys hear that every show, and this show did not disappoint. And we definitely didn't miss a beat with all the things we talked about. And of course, we can go for hours and days, and I'm sure I'm going to try to get them back on together later on in the future, probably add 2 more people. So we have all types of screens on here, but we definitely, you guys should have learned a lot. If you guys have questions, obviously go on their LinkedIn pages, reach out to them. And I could tell you, just based on the energy, although we're on Zoom, all the energy that I have been able to feel through this camera is definitely something of growth and making each other better. So, guys, any final words you guys have for the audience?
Those of you that are in law enforcement, be safe, protect the brand. It's if you were to ask me, would I go into law enforcement today? I absolutely I would. Do some things differently, but I definitely would. It's an honorable, noble profession, no greater profession. So keep doing what you're doing, and your service to our communities is greatly appreciated.
Yes, definitely. Piggyback on what Vinny was saying. Yes, definitely. Wish all you guys are safe, able to come home every night. And I too would do it all over again, do some things differently, but I definitely do it all over again. And I still consider myself not only a law enforcement ambassador, but an ambassador for just men in general. So I'm here to help as well. Reach out via LinkedIn, and I'll do my best to get back to you and help you out.
Viewers, audience, guys and gals, you guys have heard it. You've heard it from 2 ambassadors of law enforcement, 2 ambassadors of men, 2 ambassadors of just doing the right thing. They've been through things, guys. If you want to hear their experiences, if you want to just connect and get the real scoop on what's going on, I can tell you on this show, obviously we have a little bit of censorship because we know a lot of people are going to listen to it. But if you want even more raw, unedited versions of them, reach out to them. Listen to their stories, listen to their experiences, because they have been through things. They've been through things in a big city, in a big state. So we know that they have a lot of valuable information, guys. Thank you for watching this podcast. Thank you for viewing the podcast. If you guys liked what you heard, make sure you comment, make sure you share. If you have questions for me, I can direct it to them. And I know if they don't have the answer, I'm sure they can find somebody that does. 60 plus years of law enforcement between the 2 of them. I'm sure they've met a few people in their time, and they'll be more than happy to direct you in that path, because a part of mentorship is being able to introduce people to others. So once again, guys, thank you for all you do. Thank you for the sacrifices you make and continue to make on a daily basis. Be safe and have a great day.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.
Like that, I'm going to be leaving a note. My vehicle is driving and remove it.